Welcome to Family Basics 101. I'm Dr. Bruce McClure, and as we begin a 5-part series entitled Phobias, we will look over the next 5 lessons at, first, what is a phobia? Secondly, we will look at the causes of phobia, and then we will discuss the types of phobias, and then we will discuss the impacts of phobias upon one's life, and finally we will discuss how do you treat phobias. Let's begin by talking about a simple definition of phobia. Phobias are those generally fright feelings created by objects or created by events that causes a significant disruption to routine functioning and the ability of one that causes the person to have within them somewhat of a created or sometimes an overwhelming sense of internal stress. So the creation is on the inside of the individual, driven by external actual things or objects and how the person thinks about those items. According to the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual, that's basically the source book for psychiatric and psychological care, phobia is present when an overwhelming amount of anxiety or fear presents itself when the proximity of safety begins to diminish between the person and the phobia stimuli. The stimuli are those events, those situations, or those objects that triggers that sense of unsettledness inside the individual. More specifically, phobias are indicated by a chronic, readily identifiable object or objects or situations through direct exposure to the stimuli, or if the exposure in terms of how you think about it is too vivid as it is told to a person through the testimonies of others about specific situations or specific objects. In essence, it boils down to a person does not have to physically see, touch, or be in the physical proximity of the object or situation, but how vivid are the stories, how vivid are the testimonies from others about something that induces an internal anxiety that is overstimulating to the comfort of the individual. That can also stimulate a person to a phobic feeling. They've never experienced it, they've never been around it, and in all likelihood in their lifetime they will never be around it. But the vivid testimony of another person can stimulate that sense of unsettledness inside another person. The phobic response is mostly always too excessive and too unreasonable, which is rarely disputed by older children and adults. In essence, when the response is too excessive, when the response is too unreasonable, most older children and most adults will admit, I know I'm over responding to this. I know I should not feel this way about this, but I do. That's where I'm coming from when I say the phobic response is always too excessive and too unreasonable. And most adults and most older teens know that their response is really not equal to whatever that stimuli might be. but nonetheless, it stimulates that phobic response. In order for others to say that an individual is truly suffering from a phobia, from an object, from a situation, the following criteria must exist. Sometimes people use the term phobia basically out of character with what the term really means. Number one, there must be a clear and chronic fear that is excessive and also unreasonable, that has a specific source, such as heights, animals, the fear of flying, etc. But there must be a specific source that is triggering the stimuli. Secondly, being exposed to a specific stimuli that creates an immediate anxiety response, such as a panic attack. In other words, as soon as you come in proximity with whatever that stimuli is, it creates a high accelerated, inappropriate anxiety response. Thirdly, the individual acknowledges that their response is over the top and excessive. The person just admits, I am petrified by the thought of this. And if you're telling me I've got to see it, touch it, be in the real proximity of it, I know I'm going to faint, I know it's going to create hysteria in me, then that's where I'm coming from in terms of knowing that these criteria exist. If a person is telling you this, then in all likelihood it necessitates listening, because they're defining to us they really have a phobia. The phobic event is either avoided or engaged with an overly intense distress or anxiety. The person is basically a nervous wreck from the beginning to the end of the thought or the exposure. The attempt to avoid the situation causes normal event routines, normal actions to be interfered with regarding the effectiveness and their maximum effort. In essence, when a person cannot function during routine daily environments, because within that confine there are also these situations and these objects that creates the panic, then indeed that person is saying, I am really afraid of this setting. If the duration exists, especially in children or people under age 18, for more than 6 months, if that high anxiety, if that fright inside continues for more than 6 months, then indeed that person is defining to you that they have a phobic reaction to whatever it might be. In the book of 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 14, the Bible says, but even if you suffer because of righteousness, you're still blessed. Be courageous and undisturbed. And if you suffer for righteousness, that term suffer means be exposed to and to be exposed to a terror, be exposed to a phobic or frightening dread. But it says be not phobic about it. Do not take flight. Do not be seized with alarm. Do not allow that terror to cause you to basically drop in your tracks and not be able to respond. Because the next phrase in the text says, be not troubled. Do not let it over agitate you. Do not let it make you overly unrestful. Do not allow it to stir you up to the point to where you cannot function. I'll see you back in class again next time. Don't be late and don't skip class.